A city folds upward like a sheet of paper. Human bodies rotate inside a corridor that has lost gravity. Soldiers lined across a beach wait for bombs to fall from the sky. A wave rises like a mountain, while a few hours for a father in space become decades for the daughter he left on Earth. A fired bullet returns to a gun, and an exploded building assembles itself again. A flash illuminates the desert, followed several seconds later by a crushing roar. These events belong to different eras, different genres, and different universes. Yet, within only a few seconds, we understand. This is Christopher Nolan's world. But where does that feeling come from? Is it the dark suits, the enormous clocks, the low, resonant music, the complex structures of time, or the IMAX cameras and practical stunts? All of these elements certainly define Nolan's cinema, but they are the surface of his worlds, not the engine that makes them move. What Nolan truly designs is not the geography or history of an imaginary world. He designs the conditions that determine what people can know inside that world, what they cannot trust, how they experience time, and the moment when knowledge becomes responsibility. Nolan does not simply show us a world. He reorganizes our perception and traps us inside the same misunderstandings, fears, and temptations as his characters. In this video, we will move from Following to Oppenheimer and then to the Odyssey to understand how Nolan makes non-existent worlds feel heavier than reality itself. Conventional world building often begins with a map. Borders, politics, history, religions, science, technology, peoples, and languages. But Nolan rarely begins there. He begins with a fact that one person cannot accept. The young writer in Following cannot feel that he truly exists unless he follows strangers and peers into their lives. The London through which he moves feels anonymous, unstable, and owned by no one. Not because the city itself is empty, but because the protagonist has no stable self within him. He enters other people's rooms and studies photographs, letters, clothes, and small boxes as though he could borrow their lives. The world of Following is not built from the geography of London. It is built from the absence inside a man who cannot feel himself unless he follows someone else. In Memento, this principle expands into the structure of the entire film. Leonard cannot form new, long-term memories. In a conventional film, this would be treated as a burden carried by the protagonist. Nolan refuses to leave it in the background. If Leonard cannot preserve the past, the audience must not be allowed to preserve it either. By moving the color narrative backward from effect to cause, every new scene forces us to ask the same questions as Leonard. Where am I? Is the person in front of me an ally? What happened immediately before this, and who wrote the information I now believe? Leonard's cognitive condition is not merely characterization, it becomes the temporal law of the film's world. In Insomnia, Detective Dormer's guilt is translated into the endless daylight of Alaska. Night never arrives, so he cannot sleep. Without sleep, he cannot organize his thoughts, and without that clarity, the boundaries between guilt, exhaustion, and error begin to collapse. In the fog, truth cannot be seen. Under the midnight sun, guilt cannot be hidden. The external climate becomes a physical environment that reflects the protagonist's moral condition. Angier and Borden in The Prestige are not driven by a pure fascination with magic. One loses his wife and transforms that loss into revenge against another man. The other turns his entire life into a secret in order to become a great magician. Their stage machinery, diaries, doubles, bird cages, and duplication machine all grow out of loss and obsession. The dream world of Inception works in the same way. Cobb can design dreams freely. He can fold cities, summon buildings, and enter another person's subconscious. But what truly controls him is not dream technology. It is the idea he planted in his wife, Mal, and the guilt of losing her as a result. That is why Mal's projection invades even the most carefully designed dream. Cobb's wound breaks the security of the world itself. In Interstellar, a father must leave his daughter in order to save humanity. This contradiction generates the entire film. Relativity is not there to display scientific knowledge. 1 hour in one place becomes 7 years of his daughter's life. A cosmic difference in time becomes a father's guilt. Oppenheimer presents an even greater contradiction. Creating a weapon to save the world also creates the condition under which the world can be destroyed forever. The scientist's desire to know collides with the responsibility of the human being who turns knowledge into reality. Nolan has explained that he wrote the screenplay in the first person and designed Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer as the audience's point of vision. Most of the story does not move beyond what he experiences, so we do not observe history objectively. We experience it from within Oppenheimer's excitement, ambition, fear, and self-justification. This reveals the first principle of Nolan's world-building. Before you build the world, create the fact your protagonist cannot accept. In Nolan's films, a wound is not merely part of a character's past. The wound bends time, invades space, fractures the image, and generates the physical laws of the world. Nolan's films contain enormous acts of fiction. Dreams can be shared. Human beings can be duplicated. The temporal direction of matter can be reversed. Information can be sent into the past from inside a black hole. Yet Nolan does not make every part of the world fantastical. Instead, he introduces one impossible law and makes everything around it relentlessly ordinary. Batman, in Batman Begins, is obviously an extraordinary being, but the streets beneath him, the buildings that fall, the vehicles that move, and the bodies that are injured all possess the weight of reality. When discussing the Batman trilogy, Nolan has said that what mattered was not realism in a strict sense, but whether the audience could relate to and physically feel the world. Batman is abnormal. The city around him must therefore possess the weight of an ordinary crime film or action film. Only then can the people of Gotham also experience Batman as something extraordinary. Batman Begins does not suddenly present a completed Batman. Bruce studies the criminal world, learns about fear, trains with the League of Shadows, chooses the bat as a symbol, repurposes military prototypes, and combines a cape, armor, weapons, and vehicles. The myth of Batman is generated through accumulation. Procurement, design, training, and failure. Nolan is deeply interested in this process of becoming. He has said that he wants to avoid stories that remain plausible until the final moment, only to make a convenient leap. Explaining where Batman's equipment comes from is not simply a way to close gaps in the setting. It allows us to watch an ordinary human being become an extraordinary symbol. That process is itself the entertainment. The Prestige uses the same method. It introduces the impossible device of Tesla's duplication machine. But everything around that device is grounded in physical stagecraft. Ropes, pulleys, trapdoors, doubles, lighting, costumes, and the direction of the audience's gaze. Because most of the film is built from realistic theatrical machinery, the single impossibility of the duplication machine gains enough force to destroy the entire world around it. Inception barely explains the invention of shared dreaming. Who created it? How widely is it used? How is it treated by the law? The film does not answer these questions in detail. Instead, it shows us the work performed with dreams. An architect designs the space. A forger performs another identity. A chemist controls the depth of sedation. The target's subconscious attacks intruders. A synchronized kick must be arranged across multiple levels to return to reality. The dream is not presented as fantasy. It becomes a workplace defined by division of labor, training, and risk management. Tenet treats inversion in the same way. A person moving backward through time cannot breathe ordinary air. Because the thermodynamic direction is different, fire and injury behave differently. A traveler must verify what is happening on both sides of a turnstile. During an operation, a forward-moving unit and an inverted unit use information from one another.
The impossible law becomes a problem of masks, storage facilities, weapons transport, traffic, and military procedure. The important point is that Nolan does not make us believe a world by explaining everything. Instead of explaining the cause, he portrays the consequences with complete consistency. Even when the origin of a technology remains unknown, the audience can trust the world if the constraints of using it remain coherent. Nolan's principle can therefore be restated. Do not make the entire world strange. Show how one strange law deforms ordinary life. But this method also carries a danger. As long as procedure remains connected to a character's desire, exposition becomes drama. When Ariadne folds Paris in Inception, we learn the laws of dreams while also discovering the danger Cobb is hiding. But in parts of Tenet, the volume of rules exceeds the strength of the protagonist's personal desire. At that point, procedure begins to feel less like drama and more like a lesson. The problem is not the amount of information. The question is whether that information remains connected to failure, fear, and choice.
Nolan's complexity does not come from rearranging events at random. He transforms the theme of a film not only into the content of the story, but into the shape of the story itself. Memento is not a film that merely explains a memory disorder. The film itself is structured to interfere with the audience's memory. The color sequences move backward. The black and white sequences move forward. One line returns from consequence toward cause, the other approaches consequence from cause. When the two timelines connect, the audience does not arrive at the final solution to the case. We arrive at the moment Leonard begins manufacturing the evidence he needs to create his next act of revenge. In a conventional mystery, the past is recovered at the end and the truth becomes stable. In Memento, the closer we move toward the truth, the more clearly we see that the protagonist does not truly want it. The reverse structure is not merely a surprise. It is the form of Leonard's self-deception, through which he reshapes causes to fit the result he needs in order to preserve his purpose. In The Prestige, the entire film imitates the three stages of a magic trick. First, something ordinary is presented. Then it disappears. Finally, what vanished is made to return. But the real trick is not that the film hides the answer. Most of the answer is visible from the beginning. The multiple hats, the crushed bird, Borden's inconsistent behavior, the death Angier repeats every night. Yet the audience wants an elegant and complicated explanation more than a simple and brutal answer. That desire causes us to overlook the evidence ourselves. The film does more than deceive its audience. It uses the fact that the audience wants to be deceived. In Inception, the levels of the dream become the levels of the narrative. The city in the rain, the hotel, the mountain fortress, and limbo, where the outline of time begins to collapse. These worlds are not independent. When the van falls from the bridge on the upper level, its fall removes gravity from the hotel. When bodies move in the hotel, the preparation for the kick changes on the level below. Time also passes at a different speed on every level. A single instant in one world can be stretched into a long period of action in another. The climax is not simply cutting between several locations. One event is propagating through universes that move at different speeds of time. Dunkirk runs 3 durations in parallel: 1 week, 1 day, 1 hour. The soldiers on land wait for a week. The civilian boat takes a day to cross the sea. The fighter plane has only about an hour of fuel. This structure is not a puzzle designed merely to surprise the audience. It expresses how the same historical event possesses a completely different duration depending on where a person stands. Time on the beach becomes endless suspension. Time at sea becomes movement toward rescue. Time in the air becomes a calculation in which fuel disappears second by second.
Although the three timelines are different on the clock, they converge on the same moment near the end of the film. Only then do we understand that actions we had watched separately were creating the conditions for one another's survival. In Tenet, the second half revisits events from the first half in the opposite temporal direction. Movements that initially appeared unnatural are later revealed to have been performed by the protagonist himself. The audience must do more than remember the past. We must assign that past a new chain of cause and effect. Time no longer behaves as a straight line. It folds back toward its own cause. In Oppenheimer, the narrative structure becomes even more particle-like. His university years, quantum physics, his relationships with members of the Communist Party, Los Alamos, the Trinity test, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, post-war politics, the security clearance hearing, Strauss's confirmation hearing. These events do not unfold in a calm chronology. They collide at high speed. Each short scene enters the next like a neutron, producing another reaction and pushing the entire film toward critical mass. The editing begins to move like a nuclear chain reaction. Nolan has said that he thinks of narrative structure as geography or geometry. When he cannot see the flow and shape of a story, he feels that he has not yet understood it. But he does not mechanically impose structure from an intellectual diagram. He begins with an intuition or an emotion, then searches for the form that emotion requires. That is why Nolan's manipulation of time is not decoration. In Memento, time reverses moral judgment. In Interstellar, time expands the distance between people who love one another. In Dunkirk, time compresses heroism into a single decision.
In Oppenheimer, the meaning of an action can only be understood years after it has occurred. For Nolan, time is not simply a matter of clocks. It is an ethical force that changes when a human choice acquires meaning. Time, memory, dreams, guilt, responsibility. These are abstract ideas that cannot be photographed directly. Nolan does not rely only on long speeches to explain them. He translates them into objects, architecture, distance, and action. In Memento, memory becomes Polaroid photographs, handwritten notes, and tattoos carved into the body. Leonard does not trust his brain, so he moves memory outside himself. At first glance, a photograph appears objective, but the meaning of a photograph does not exist inside the image alone. Who took it? What was written on it? What was not written? Which photograph was preserved and which was destroyed? Even after creating an external memory system, Leonard remains the person who interprets it. More physical evidence does not necessarily bring him closer to the truth. Evidence can also make self-deception more durable. In Batman Begins, fear is translated into a mask, a cape, a cave, a voice, and a system of lighting. Bruce does not simply overcome fear, he transforms the bat he once feared into a symbol he can send back toward criminals. A psychological state becomes a body and a sign moving through the city. In The Prestige, secrecy becomes diaries, keys, ciphers, bird cages, false bottoms, doubles, and sealed water tanks. A diary appears to preserve the past, but Angier and Borden do not write their diaries to reveal the truth to one another. They write to guide the other man toward the wrong place. The act of recording becomes a trap. In Inception, the human mind becomes a city and a piece of architecture. The mazes designed by Ariadne, the vault protecting Fisher's secret, the elevator in which Cobb imprisons his memories, the city he built with Mal, and limbo as it begins to collapse. Entering the deepest part of the mind is no longer a metaphor. It becomes spatial movement. Descending in the elevator means approaching the memories Cobb has hidden. Opening the vault means opening Fisher's emotional core. Dream architecture is not background scenery. It is human defense, desire, and repression, transformed into a space through which characters can physically walk. In Interstellar, time becomes watches, video messages, enormous waves, and bookshelves. The wave on Miller's planet is not merely a natural disaster. the years being lost on Earth approach with physical height. When Cooper returns to the spacecraft and watches his children grow through recorded messages, time is no longer a number. It becomes a succession of changing faces. Inside the Tesseract, a higher dimensional space is not represented as abstract geometry. It becomes the bookshelf in his daughter's room. The transmission of information across cosmic scales is reduced to the private space shared by a father and daughter. In Tenet, the direction of time becomes red and blue rooms, turnstiles, oxygen masks, wounds, and inverted bullets. The difficult concept of time reversal becomes the experience of crossing a threshold, attaching a respirator, and seeing yourself run in the opposite direction. In Oppenheimer, the potential energy inside matter becomes light, particles, vibration, fire, trembling walls, and the sound of a crowd stamping its feet. The theory inside Oppenheimer's mind becomes a sensation capable of shaking the world. Nolan's objects and architecture matter for more than their symbolic value. His characters use them in an effort to understand the world. But objects help human beings understand while also deceiving them. A photograph preserves memory, but it can also preserve a lie. A diary records truth, but it can also direct the reader. A totem is supposed to determine reality, yet the meaning of the totem is itself unstable. A scientific instrument helps us understand nature, but that understanding can become a weapon. In Nolan's worlds, objects are not merely symbols. They are tools through which human beings convince themselves that truth can be possessed, and devices that expose how fragile that conviction really is. Nolan has said that when he first saw Blade Runner as a child, he felt that its world continued to function beyond the rooms and streets visible on the screen. A film should not end at the edge of the frame. Its world should possess its own logic and texture and extend into unseen space. Nolan has tried to bring this feeling into all of his work. So how can a filmmaker make the world beyond the image feel real? It is not enough to show more buildings or larger crowds. The crucial step is to place institutions, economies, labor, and flows of power outside the protagonist. The Gotham of the Batman trilogy contains more than Wayne Enterprises. It contains the police, prosecutors, courts, banks, hospitals, television, organized crime, military research, and public transportation. Each institution moves the city according to a different logic. Bruce possesses enormous wealth, but he does not directly control Gotham as a whole. He needs cooperation from the police. He must confront corruption within his own corporation. He relies on the legitimacy of the district attorney, and he must fight the economy created by criminal organizations. Batman is powerful, yet he cannot separate himself from the systems of the city. Inception does not explain the global history of dream-sharing technology. Instead, it shows traces of military use, corporate espionage, black markets, specialized professions, and international movement. Cobb and his team are not magicians of the dream world. They are workers hired by corporations. They research targets, recruit specialists, and perform their work as a crime. We sense that nations, corporations, and criminals are using the same technology beyond the limits of the frame. Tenet contains free ports, arms trading, intelligence agencies, material arriving from the future, and a secret organization protecting inversion technology. The future society itself is barely shown, yet the objects and instructions moving backward imply that future generations have become desperate enough to hate the material world of the present and attack the past. In Oppenheimer, the institutions that move the world become even more complex. Universities, laboratories, the military, Congress, corporations, intelligence agencies, surveillance surrounding the Communist Party, nuclear policy, the security clearance system. Oppenheimer did not build the atomic bomb alone. He assembled scientists with different abilities and ideologies, negotiated with the military, built a town, distributed resources, and managed a project on the scale of a nation. But he is not the person who decides where the completed bomb will be used. Nor does he decide how much influence scientists will have over nuclear policy after the war. Institutions magnify individual ability, but the individual does not necessarily control the consequences produced by that amplified ability. This pattern appears repeatedly across Nolan's films. Bruce can create Batman, but he cannot fully control the imitators and reactions that Batman produces. Cobb can design another person's dream, but he cannot control how dream technology will be used by society. Oppenheimer can build the bomb, but he cannot stop the nuclear arms race. Another element that gives these worlds depth is the antagonist. Nolan has said that a powerful villain is not simply a person who says something wrong. A powerful villain speaks part of the truth. Ra's al Ghul, the Joker, and Bane each sincerely believe in their own interpretation of the world. Ra's believes that a corrupt society must be destroyed before it can be reborn. The Joker believes that human morality is a mask, sustained only while safety is guaranteed. Bane turns anger at inequality into the language of revolution, while creating a military dictatorship and preparing the city's destruction. Their methods are extreme, but their diagnosis contains something the protagonist cannot easily dismiss. That is why Batman cannot simply defeat them by hitting them. He must demonstrate that human beings may refuse to kill one another even under terror, that a symbol can inspire action rather than impose control, that an imperfect order may still be worth improving. Through his own actions, he must present another interpretation of the world. This kind of ideological enemy is not limited to the Batman trilogy. In The Prestige, Angier and Borden become mirrors of one another. Both believe that great art is worth the sacrifice of a life. The difference is whose life they are willing to sacrifice. Dr. Mann in Interstellar shows how far a human being can justify himself when a noble mission for humanity collides with the instinct for personal survival. Strauss in Oppenheimer prevents the film from presenting Oppenheimer as a simple victim. From Strauss's perspective, Oppenheimer wounds other people, remains evasive about his own political judgments, and later attempts to claim moral authority. In Nolan's strongest worlds, the conflict between hero and villain is not a simple battle between good and evil. What is the world? How far can human beings be trusted? Does the end justify the means? The conflict is a struggle between two worldviews over the answer. Nolan does not reject CGI. He has acknowledged that CGI is extremely powerful for removing wires, combining different elements, supporting dangerous stunts, and extending photographed material. The distinction he makes is not between computers and live action. It is between an image built upon a photographed physical element and an image generated from nothing. Nolan prefers to place some physical material in front of the camera first, then extend it digitally. He is not interested in effects that exist only to display the size of the budget. He uses CGI to connect different materials so that they appear to belong to a single reality. The rotating corridor in Inception is a clear example. A full-size hotel corridor was built inside a mechanism that could rotate the set itself. The actors and the camera were placed inside it. Their bodies genuinely fell from the floor toward the walls. They did not need to pretend that gravity had changed. They lost their balance, pushed against the walls, and dropped toward the ceiling. The movement of their clothes, the slipping of their feet, and the impact upon their bodies were not calculated animation. They were physical events produced on the set. The impossible law of the dream is proven through the actor's body. Interstellar also constructed spacecraft interiors, farms, and alien terrain as physical environments whenever possible. Production designer Nathan Crowley has long emphasized building places in which actors can actually exist, rather than replacing the environment in post-production. Interstellar combines spacecraft sets, Icelandic glaciers, shallow expanses of water, and large projected images. The actors respond to actual light and physical landscapes rather than an empty green wall. Real objects contain information that cannot be fully controlled. The weight of materials, reflections of light, the movement of dust, the direction of an actor's gaze within space, the instant in which a body regains its balance, the physical position occupied by the camera. These small uncertainties give the resistance of reality to impossible ideas such as dreams, space travel, and inverted time. Practical filmmaking is not simply a nostalgic aesthetic. It becomes physical evidence presented to the audience. In Oppenheimer, this principle is applied to both history and psychology. Los Alamos was not created by endlessly building in every direction. The production first determined where the cameras would be placed, then positioned the necessary buildings so that a limited area could represent an entire town. The designers shared models with the cinematography team. They built not an unlimited environment, but the precise reality required by the film's point of view. The subjective images of particles, stars, fire, and vibration inside the atom were also based as much as possible on analog photographic experiments. The goal was not to create an exact scientific illustration. The goal was to use real light and real material to express the way Oppenheimer imagines the force within matter as beautiful, seductive, and terrifying at the same time. During the Trinity test, the flash truly illuminates human faces and the surrounding landscape. The explosion and the characters' reactions therefore seem to belong to the same physical space. This method reaches another stage in The Odyssey. It became the first feature film photographed entirely on IMAX film. Traditional IMAX cameras were extremely loud and difficult to use in quiet dialogue scenes. New soundproofing systems were therefore developed, along with methods that allowed actors to maintain eye contact even across the enormous camera. For Nolan, IMAX is not simply a way to increase resolution. Its purpose is to remove the conscious boundary of the screen and fill the audience's peripheral vision with the world of the film. This is the essence of Nolan's commitment to practical filmmaking. He is not claiming that what we see is reality. He is showing evidence that something genuinely happened in the real world in order to create this fiction. In a conventional film, editing and music organize photographed material and emphasize emotion. In Nolan's cinema, editing and sound make the world move. His specialty is not finishing one action sequence and then beginning another. He runs multiple places, people, and crises in parallel. Each adds a small amount of pressure until they combine into one enormous movement. Nolan has described this as a snowballing form, in which separate events continue joining and increasing in force. In The Dark Knight, the confrontation with the Joker, the two fairies, Harvey Dent, and Gordon's family unfold in parallel. In Inception, the falling van, the weightless hotel, the mountain fortress, and Limbo move simultaneously. In The Dark Knight Rises, the street battle, the vehicle carrying the bomb, the bridge, the aircraft, and Wayne Manor are connected into one extended climax. The music and effects refuse to release the tension. They push pressure from different locations in the same direction. Editing here is not simply a technique for compressing time. It makes distant events into one another's causes and consequences. In Dunkirk, sound itself becomes a clock. According to editor Lee Smith, the continuous musical structure running through much of the film was built from the ticking of Nolan's stopwatch. The ticking does not refer to one particular bomb or one literal clock. It creates the sensation that something is always being lost. On the beach, it is the time remaining until rescue. Inside a ship, it is the time remaining before the vessel sinks. In the air, it is the time remaining before the fuel runs out. The ticking combines three timelines into one bodily sensation. Dunkirk also makes the sound of approaching aircraft into a threat instead of explaining the psychology of enemy soldiers. The sound grows closer before the plane becomes visible. No one knows where the bomb will fall. Like the soldiers, the audience must look upward and estimate the location of danger through sound. An enemy who is never explained becomes present through sound alone. In Tenet, the direction of sound itself is transformed. Simply reversing recordings of gunfire, vehicles, fragments, and breathing would not have created the texture of the world. Sound designer Richard King and his team considered what would sound abnormal to each character when forward and inverted time occupied the same space. They designed new sounds that feel as though they are moving against causality. The Trinity test in Oppenheimer uses the opposite technique. Sound disappears. The flash arrives immediately. The shockwave arrives later. Nolan does not remove this physical delay. The silence after the flash forces the audience to wait beside the characters, unable to understand what has happened. When the roar finally arrives, an explosion we had only seen collides with the body. During the victory speech, the stamping of the crowd becomes an explosive force. The walls tremble. Faces are consumed by white light. A room celebrating success overlaps with hallucinations of destroyed bodies. Sound is not the atmosphere of a scene. A ticking clock becomes a time limit. Breathing becomes life support. Footsteps become public expectation and guilt. Silence becomes the delay before understanding catches up with sound. In Nolan's cinema, editing and sound do not explain the world. They move it like gravity, time, and pressure. Nolan's films are often described as complex, yet the emotions at their center are surprisingly simple. I want to go home. I want to see my children. I want to recover the person I lost. I want my father to recognize me. I want to believe that what I did was not meaningless. Inception contains dream levels, different speeds of time, subconscious projections, and corporate espionage. But Cobb's goal is to see the faces of his children. At the end, the important question is not only whether the spinning top falls, it is the fact that Cobb stops watching it. He does not wait to prove reality perfectly before living. He walks toward his children inside a world that cannot be proven with certainty. Interstellar contains relativity, gravitational equations, wormholes, black holes, and higher dimensional beings. But when Nolan gave Hans Zimmer the emotional starting point for the score, he did not explain space or physics. He gave him a short story about a father leaving his child in order to perform important work. The music for an epic space film began with a separation between a father and a child. The emotional gravity was established before the scientific world. That is why the more than 20 years lost on Miller's planet do not remain a science fiction spectacle. Cooper has not merely lost a number. Through recorded messages, he receives his daughter's graduation, love, marriage, family, the death of her brother, and her anger toward her father all at once. Relativity becomes the amount of a life in which he could not participate as a parent. The center of Dunkirk is not victory in war. It is survival and return. The soldiers believe they have been defeated and will carry shame back to their country. But through the food passed through the train window and the voice of a young man reading the newspaper, they discover that returning home is not only defeat.
National history is reduced to the question of whether one exhausted soldier will be accepted. In Oppenheimer, a problem of world history is concentrated into the expression of one human face. The scientists calculated whether a nuclear chain reaction might spread through the atmosphere and burn the entire Earth. That physical chain reaction did not occur, but at the end of the film, Oppenheimer tells Einstein that they may have started another kind of chain reaction: the nuclear arms race, missiles, a planet consumed by fire. The physical chain reaction did not happen. A political, military, and psychological chain reaction began instead. Nolan's endings are powerful because they separate the intellectual question from the emotional resolution. In Memento, the complete truth of the case is never established, but it becomes clear that Leonard deliberately creates the enemy he needs. In Inception, the film never confirms whether the final world is reality or dream, but we understand that Cobb has released his obsession with proof. In The Dark Knight Rises, certain details remain open to interpretation, but the thematic movement is complete. Batman survives as a symbol beyond Bruce as an individual. Nolan has said that the ambiguity of Inception's ending is intellectual, not emotional. Cobb has already made his decision and is with his children. Only the proof of reality is left to the audience. This structure reveals Nolan's resistance to nihilism. The world does not need to be completely understood before a person can act. A victory does not need to last forever for someone to be saved. Even if the future appears fixed, a person can still accept the choice required to bring that future into existence. Even when responsibility cannot reverse the consequence, speaking about responsibility still matters. Nolan's worlds are not optimistic, but they do not confuse the absence of guaranteed meaning with the absence of meaning in action.
At this point, Nolan's method of world building may seem like an almost perfect system, but his strengths and weaknesses emerge from the same source. The first danger is that the world may feel less like a space inhabited by human beings and more like a puzzle designed by the author. In Memento, the complex structure is Leonard's experience. In Inception, the dream levels remain connected to Cobb's guilt. In Dunkirk, removing the characters' detailed backgrounds strengthens the bodily experience of waiting, breathing, distance, and fuel. But in parts of Tenet, the attention required to understand the rules of the world is not balanced by the emotion the audience can invest in the characters. The protagonist deliberately has no name and almost no personal history. He is presented as a role. The temporal structure may be precise, but what can be lost inside that structure feels weaker. The farewell with Neil near the end becomes powerful because an abstract temporal system is finally translated into a human relationship. For the protagonist, it is a goodbye. For Neil, it is the beginning of a long friendship. The asymmetry of time becomes human sadness. The second limitation is the tendency for female characters to be reduced to the memory, guilt, or motivation of male protagonists. Leonard's wife in Memento, Julia and Sarah in The Prestige, Rachel in The Dark Knight, Mal in Inception. Their death or loss activates the actions of men. Mal, in particular, possesses an overwhelming presence. Yet most of the Mal we see is not the woman who actually lived. She is a projection created by Cobb's guilt. She is therefore a character, but also a device that destroys the interior world of a male protagonist. Of course, not every woman in Nolan's films is passive. Natalie exploits Leonard's condition. Ariadne identifies Cobb's psychological flaw. Murph completes the gravitational equation and makes humanity's escape possible. Kat kills the man who controlled her through an act of her own will. Kitty reverses the institutional attack against her husband during the hearing. Even so,
the central point of view remains overwhelmingly male, and women are often positioned in support of a man's return or guilt. The third limitation is Nolan's tendency to reduce political problems to individual ethics. The Batman trilogy addresses inequality, surveillance, law, policing, terrorism, and popular uprising. But Nolan did not want The Dark Knight Rises to be fixed to a single position on the political left or right. He wanted to show how political rhetoric could be appropriated for an opposite purpose. This openness allows the film to move beyond policy debates tied to one historical moment, but it also creates the danger that structural problems appear solvable through the choice of one good individual. The surveillance machine in The Dark Knight is destroyed through the ethical judgment of Lucius Fox. Real systems of surveillance cannot be solved by the restraint of one virtuous administrator. In The Dark Knight Rises, anger at inequality is exploited by Bane's false revolution. As a result, criticism of inequality overlaps with criticism of a dictator who exploits inequality, and the distinction becomes blurred. The most important issue is the ethics of restricted point of view. Oppenheimer creates extraordinary immersion by trapping the audience inside Oppenheimer's subjectivity. But that choice prevents the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki from entering the film as people with direct subjectivity of their own. The film portrays the experience of a man who built the bomb but did not witness its use. Refusing to show the destruction expresses Oppenheimer's distance and blind spot. At the same time, the film risks making invisible the people he did not see. Directly recreating their suffering might produce another problem by converting that suffering into spectacle. There is no simple answer, but one fact must be recognized. Restricting perspective is not a neutral technique. It is an ethical decision that determines who may exist within the world of the film and who is pushed beyond the frame. The same problem exists in Nolan's spectacle. He portrays the terror of destruction. At the same time, he presents fighter planes, military vehicles, explosions, and collapsing cities as overwhelmingly seductive images. If the Trinity test in Oppenheimer did not appear beautiful, the audience might not understand why the scientists were seduced by its power. But if it appears too beautiful, the audience may begin to worship the very force the film criticizes. Nolan does not place the viewer in a morally safe position. Before condemning destruction, he makes us experience its attraction. The question is whether the second half of the work can sufficiently reframe that temptation. The limitations of Nolan's cinema are not external problems attached to the films.
They are problems of world building itself. To build a world is not only to decide what will be shown, it is also to decide what will not be shown. Whose time will become central, whose pain will appear only as another person's guilt. The boundary itself is part of the world.
At first glance, the Odyssey appears to be a major change of direction for Nolan. Ancient Greece, mythological monsters, a maritime adventure, a king returning from war. But at a deeper level, there may be no story more suited to him. Nolan has described the Odyssey as an epic adventure with a love story at its center. No matter how large the action becomes, the adventure has no meaning unless the audience cares about the character's emotions. This is the principle Nolan has repeated for years. Connect enormous scale to intimate feeling. Nolan has also emphasized the ancient Greek idea of xenia, the duty to protect a guest and welcome a stranger. Once people leave home, they depend upon the goodwill of strangers in order to survive. A law requiring food, shelter, and safety for a guest therefore becomes one of the foundations of civilization. Once again, Nolan does not explain an enormous world through encyclopedic detail. He establishes one law, then reveals the ethics of the world through those who obey it and those who violate it. At the center of the Odyssey is return. But return does not mean restoring the condition that existed before departure.
Can a man who has experienced war return as the same husband, father, and king? Can the family who waited accept the returned man as the same person who left? Can two people, changed by time, build a new relationship rather than simply recover an old one? This question allows us to reread Nolan's entire filmography. The protagonist of Following cannot return to the self he was before looking into other people's lives. Leonard in Memento keeps trying to return to the world in which his wife was alive. Because that return is impossible, he creates an endless cycle of revenge. Bruce Wayne travels through the criminal world and returns to Gotham. But the returning Bruce is no longer the man who left. He has become a symbol composed of multiple identities. Angier attempts to return to the life he possessed before losing his wife. That impossible desire leads him to kill himself again and again. Cobb wants to return to his children, but he can only return by releasing the mal preserved inside his memory. Cooper wants to return to his daughter, but the journey that lasts only a few years for him becomes an entire lifetime for her. The soldiers of Dunkirk return to their country, but they fear they will be rejected as defeated men. In Oppenheimer, return itself becomes impossible. Humanity cannot return to the world that existed before nuclear weapons. Knowledge, once acquired, cannot simply be forgotten. A possibility, once opened, cannot be restored to a state in which it never existed. In this sense, Nolan has never been telling stories only about time travel. He has been asking whether human beings can still return home after they have learned something, done something, and become someone different from who they were before. The Odyssey is made on Nolan's largest visual scale, photographed entirely in IMAX. Yet its center remains love and return. That combination may be the culmination of his method. The technology becomes larger, the world expands, but the final emotion the audience must understand remains extremely simple. Who do you want to return to? Is that person still waiting for you? And is the person who returns the same person who departed? Christopher Nolan is not a director who begins by drawing a map of the world. He places an irresolvable contradiction inside one human being. He limits the information that person can perceive. He introduces one abnormal law and follows its consequences through an otherwise ordinary world. He transforms the theme into the temporal structure of the story and translates abstract ideas into objects and architecture. Beyond the protagonist, he places institutions that no individual can completely control. He gives the antagonist a truth that the protagonist cannot easily deny. He proves impossible phenomena through actors' bodies, real light, weight, and friction. He makes editing and sound function like time and gravity. And he connects stories large enough to move the universe or history to simple emotions. The desire to go home, to see a child, to atone for guilt. That is why making a timeline more complicated is not enough to imitate Nolan. Adding low-frequency sound is not enough. Shooting in IMAX is not enough. Putting a dark suit on a character and giving him philosophical dialogue is not enough. None of these alone creates a Nolan world. 3 questions are necessary. What fact can the protagonist not accept? What single law expands that contradiction across the entire world? And, after learning the truth of that world, what responsibility can the character no longer escape? Nolan's world building is not the amount of information a world contains. It is the design of what the audience knows, what we misunderstand, what we feel through the body, and the moment when we are forced to revise our judgment. Rearranging Memento into chronological order does not remove Leonard's self-deception. Diagramming the levels of Inception does not explain away the pain of Cobb releasing Mal. Understanding the physics of Interstellar cannot restore the years lost between a father and daughter. Knowing the history of Oppenheimer does not provide an easy answer to the responsibility of a person who turns knowledge into reality. Nolan does not hand the audience a completed world. He temporarily turns the audience into inhabitants of that world. He gives us only the information available to the character. He makes us feel the same fear. He draws us toward the same temptation. And finally, he asks not only the protagonist, but the audience as well. Now that you know the laws of this world, can you return to the same place you occupied before? World building is not simply the design of how a world looks. It is the design of a world that ensures anyone who truly understands it can never remain the same person again.